So thank you so much for the participants of the roundtable discussion for this based on the rumors of this very fierce debate, because I was actually waiting for the Prime Minister, but I think the closing words were really something that that is according to our slogan, namely, amidst democratic circumstances, we do not have to agree about anything. I'll change to German now.
Ministerpräsident, lieber Herr Stoiber.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Stoiber, I would like to welcome you wholeheartedly that you have embarked on this road. I think that it was really a heroic act that you did today. You're a real fighter for freedom, a true fighter who, despite the strike and despite the cancellation of all these flights, struggled through from Munich to Budapest in such a short time. So today's conference was conceived with the plans that you will be the Auftakt, the person who addresses this. But I think that this kind of flexibility that you showed shows very well that we can round it. We can actually close it very well. You were the Minister of Internal Affairs of the Bavarian Free State, so you are a witness of the age in terms of the security policy affairs, and of course, which makes you excel also from others is your very strong and warm friendship to Hungary. Let me just recall those times when we established the Andrássy University, and let me repeat and reiterate how much you were doing it, because you have actually a kind of commitment and bond to Hungary which goes way beyond the Hungarian and Bavarian traditions. So it is a great honor for us to have you here. Thank you so much for the Heinz Seidel Stiftung for making it possible. I would like to say thanks to Gábor Todeláko, who prepared this very intensively from Munich. And now, Prime Minister, we look forward to your speech. So, Prime Minister, the floor is yours. Mr. Pröhle, dear Jörg, dear Martin Kassler, ladies and gentlemen, I am truly delighted that we could still make it possible that you have come to this great event, and I could actually listen to the questions of the debate as to how you see the situation. And as a witness of the period, on the eve before the 9th of November, namely the 10th of November, as a Bavarian Minister of Interior, spent at Mr. Horváth, who was at that time called the Hungarian Minister of Interior, and also visited Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kovács, and then the State Secretary, with whom I could pay a walk in Budapest. I will get back to this again. But this is quite a difficult situation. Who would like to touch upon the basic and fundamental things. But of course, today, the overall topic has already been dealt with from various aspects and angles. I'll try to summarize this. I was informed at 10:30 a.m. that my flight is cancelled, so the chief consul and myself were standing there at the Munich airport thinking what to do. And with the help of the chief consul and with the help of the Hungarian government, we drove by car. So to me, this is an opportunity, a reason which fully justifies that it's worthwhile to turn all stones in order to be able to commemorate this, which is an event which is of pivotal importance not only for the Germans, but I think for everyone, because this is the reunification of Europe. You should never forget about this. And today we are facing such challenges as to what is it that we do with Europe. And now, recently, there is quite a new debate going on. Macron's interview in The Economist. Macron is hard in attacking the NATO and made it quite clear that if Europe does not become a global power, then Europe will disappear. This is a sentence that in Western Europe, let alone from the words of a French president, has never been uttered, has never been said. To whom today the German Chancellor contradicted. But anyway, I'm going to be touching upon this in more detail. Yes, the foundation. Please allow me to say great thanks for the foundation. The foundation has been doing a good, in fact, an excellent job. And this is an important set of duties in the very exceptional Hungarian-Bavarian friendship, which is sometimes irritating, however. But this friendship was established between various countries, and this is the precondition of our countries to develop and also for Europe to develop. And yes, this was very in the Hans Seidel Stiftung board. I also participated, so that following the establishment of the country, so that we should also come to Hungary with this foundation. And although we cannot always see it as much as we can, but we Bavarians today are celebrating the most beautiful moment of freedom. 30 years ago, the East, and now by this I mean the eastern part of Germany, their things started to take very turbulent turns, and the decisive day could have been October the 9th, 1989, which was exactly a month before the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Then, surprisingly, in Leipzig, there was a demonstration which was allowed, which was permitted, and 70,000 people demonstrated, wanted to have a country, an open country. At that time, the danger still existed, and this is that people do not think of, that there was a danger of having a very violent outcome. It was a major threat. This is actually how it evolved, and we can be actually quite grateful that there was not one shot in the air. None of the policemen of the People's Police got mad. So it was a dramatic turn. It did have its preliminaries. It was July the 17th, 1953, when the workers of the German Democratic Republic, which had been established then, because of the norms, because of the forced jobs and low quality of life and supply, started to go on strike. But, ladies and gentlemen, that revolt was shot down by the Red Army. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this period is that we have to bear in mind, and also that we have another anniversary that has psychologically determined Europe. And when I had survived that as well, I would like to share with you this. And this is the 1956, the Hungarian fight for freedom. This kind of courage that was showcased by thousands of people to stand up against the mighty Soviet army was a historical turning point in Germany and also in Hungary. This lasted longer than this fight for freedom lasted longer than the one in Leipzig and Berlin when it comes to the days, of course. And a lot of Hungarians fled all around Europe, and many of them went to the United States and, of course, to Bavaria. A lot of people were welcomed. There is also a Hungarian secondary school, which had operated since 1958 to 2006. And, of course, Hungary and Bavaria got a bit more closer. And, of course, we should not forget that this was a European case. The Solidarity movement establishment back in the 1980s and the Pope of Poland, who had a major influence on those occurrences, without calling on to revolt. So, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you that these heroic trials and experiments in order to get freedom, because freedom was lost after the Second World War. So this desire for freedom in the European nations never, ever broke. And touching upon Gorbachev, Gorbachev's role is such that such developments started to occur, which we could not imagine how unbelievable these developments were. In my mind, I still recall that there was a 3-hour-long discussion in the Kremlin between Strauss and Gorbachev. I was the head of state chancellery, and with Theo Weigel, I was there as Strauss's right hand. So many things changed also in my mind then, which I will never forget. So what kind of challenge it was for the interpreters, because then Mikhail Gorbachev explained what he meant by glasnost and perestroika. And Strauss, who was a very informal person and very honest, he said, "We're sorry, Secretary General, but that your trial to modernize communism through perestroika and glasnost, this is as if we wanted to make a barbecue with a snowball." So it took quite a while before Gorbachev could understand it. It had to be translated like 3 times, but Strauss put it very well into words about what he wanted to say. But he was absolutely right. We can see this dramatic collapse, this dramatic fall into pieces. And actually, after this talk, 2 years after this talk, the Soviet Union fell into pieces. Just imagine December the 27th, 1987, but on November the 9th, 1989, the wall collapsed. So Europe's unification, Germany's unification, when this is mentioned by Strauss, even this nice Gorbachev froze. And he said, well, this is quite a distant history. It's not even worthwhile talking about, because you Germans had a chance. You had the Stalin in 1952. He said, yeah, you can unite, but only if you are neutral. And if during the socialism or communism you did not accept it, And Gorbachev alluded to this list, but of course, you know, there was still a second chance on the 9th of November. So despite all this, until November the 9th, the open protest against the Soviet Union was very, very dangerous. So Hungary was in the vanguard, because I remember how much impressed I was when, as a Minister of Interior and as the deputy leader of CSO, I read that on June the 16th, 1989, here in Budapest, on Hero Square, there was a mass event where 250 to 300,000 people gathered together. So at that time, this was not so without any danger. This was the young Fidesz leader, who I did not know at that time, Viktor Orbán. He told the main speech. And the desire of freedom for the Hungarians came to the forefront in that speech so much, and it was so obvious. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this naturally is a day or an event which I will never forget. And I was interested, and I got into contact with that young man, and I got familiar with him, and I met him. So my personal contact with the current prime minister dates back to that time, because then the debate was about freedom, not in the same sense as we talk about freedom today. At that time, a desire for freedom, rule of law, legality, etc., etc. You probably know what are the fundamentals of the Union, but you know all this. But at that time, and this is very important for the Eastern Europeans, they had to define what the liberty or freedom was. They wanted to describe it as opposed to dictatorship. So this is the fundament. So if we want to understand this is what we have to deal with, because probably not everyone would do this kind of thinking in the Western countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, we could see the execution of Nagy Imre. We could see the fate of Cardinal Mindszenty. We could see how the communist and the hard communist system was treating the people. On May the 2nd, one should never forget, on the 2nd of May, 1989, then at the Austrian-Hungarian border, the fence was brought down, and on June the 27th, Alois Mock and the Hungarians brought down the closed Hungarian border. August, the Pan-European picnic in Sopron, which was initiated by Otto von Habsburg. He laid down the rails to freedom, so that for the citizens of the Warsaw Pact, freedom should come. Hundreds of Eastern European citizens took advantage of this opportunity, because the borders were open for a short period of time, but they took advantage of it, so that without having to do anything, they should flee over to the other side. And then 3 months later, Hungary opened the borders to each and every German, and with this, they opened a new chapter. At that time, I was a younger politician, and these occurrences impressed me to a great extent, just like the summer. The summer of 1991 will remain in my memories because I remember that at that time, or may I express myself differently, because my thoughts are flying high, but I would like to get back to the 1980s when with Strauss I came to Budapest, and that was a time when I got familiar with the great patriot, József Antal. Antal and Strauss were having very ambitious connotations and ideas. It was quite clear that Hungary, just as in the time of communism, Hungary will play a very exceptional role, and there is a big task waiting Hungary. And the summer of 1981 will also be vividly remaining in my memory because Strauss was meeting János Kádár, the tough man of Hungary, who was the secretary of the Hungarian Assembly, the Munkáspárt, the Labour Party, and next to him there was also the CSU president. And the Secretary General was sitting there, and Strauss was seated in the second row. So it was a bit unpleasant to me, because the Secretary General is always the first person in a Communist Party. So there was a Secretary General, and here too there was a Secretary General. But how could it happen? It's very difficult to understand what was the real contents of that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's also my personal experience from Hungary that when this happened in 1989, as I mentioned, László Kovács, István Horváth, Mr. Horváth, Mr. Kovács, well, we were talking in the streets of Budapest, which was a private speech, how to go on. At that time, there was no internet, no mobile phone, so situation was much more difficult to find out the news, more difficult than we got used to it. The news came much later to me. Can you imagine? How this electrified us, how emotionally deeply touched us. To Antal, I was talking about the new situation in Europe and in Hungary. It was quite straightforward that Hungary has a justified place in the United Europe. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of my party, I am actually an honorary president of CSU, and we always departed from the fact that the German dividedness, in order to have the unification, well, this divide can change, and each and every party was voting in favor of unification. Let us just think back. You are a president, you are Strauss, you have an image, there's the fundamental treaty that was concluded under Willy Brandt, and probably you step up against this fundamental treaty based on something that's left, which is the Federal Constitutional Committee, where Strauss had, for example, in London and Paris was probably criticized, probably not in the United States, but in Berlin and Bonn, of course, he was criticized widely in all the Eastern European countries, because, you know, there was this policy of easement which was disturbed by that. Just imagine yourself in the similar situation. Even the courage, so it depends on the courage if you do things that are not without any risks. And what happened afterwards? And also within CSU, there was nobody who could have represented this in front of the Constitutional Court. It was finally the highest office that had to represent us in front of the Constitutional Court, and then he had to fight against Egon Bahr. And in the end of the day, what happened was that the necessity to unite is in our fundamental law, and that is why the citizenship should not or could not be appreciated. That's why we do not have a double citizenship, which was quite a groundbreaking ruling, which was disturbing this easement process pretty much. So, but this was a precondition that the development got started. Germany, in the middle of Europe as a big country, yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, all I wanted to say was that as an enthusiastic fighter, we showed that Europe is more than just the European community. It is not the single market, it's not the economic cooperation. It is the on our continent, free nations belong there, but also those nations who were deprived of their party. That is why it is the duty of free Europeans that they should stand up for those people and nations who do not live in liberty. So that is why Europe's liberty is undividable, and this is something that people insisted to that until 1989. It is actually quite obvious, so it was not quite understandable as to what Franz Joseph Strauss, as a prime minister, why did he go to Ceausescu, to Kadar, and to Todor Zhivkov to debate with them? I still remember Zhivkov, who was the prime minister in Bulgaria for the longer period of time, maybe for 25 years or so.
That communism had no future to it. In the end, Zhivkov could not respond to that, of course, and then the discourse was over. But the fact that there be a connection towards southeastern Europe has always been better close to the heart of the Bavarians, so to put it. We don't have to mention Queen Geisa Gisela or the battle at Lechfeld in 955 AD. These are always there, and people would hear about that every day, but it's in the consciousness, and it's imprinted on their own soul and consciousness. Ladies and gentlemen, out of ideological considerations, we must understand that from the past, enemies of ideology became friends. Ever since 1989, in creating the United Europe, we made a lot of progress. Hungary, ever since 2004, together with 8 other Eastern European nations, became a member of the European Union. For some, if I may put it that way, it's a debate which is going on here. That is, the reunification of Europe can only be completed if the European United States is created. This is a fundamental stance, and in all the times that even today in Western Europe is widespread. And here, of course, ever closer union is a deeper and deeper union, and they are partisans for that which would create a united European state. These are debates which have been going on for decades and which are arising continuously. But my opinion has always been, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me speak about this even now, that these well-built nations with historic roots are there. And I always told my friends, if the European United States should be state in the model of the United States of America, but there is no comparison in that to the historically created countries with their own historical features and specialities, so these couldn't be squeezed into it, so they cannot be put under one hat. It's more difficult than the entry of the younger countries, if I may put that way, who do not have such an historic burden or blast as European countries do. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, and this was also pointed out by Helmut Kohl, though he did not repeat it in the 1990s, we came to realize that this was not conducive to the objective. And let me tell you quite frankly that the European Union is the internal market in an economic respect. Of course, is a kind of federal state. There are some rules, united rules, so if any good is produced in the free market and it's offered, so there is no German market, just the European internal market is there. So in older times, there were times when the Italians said, oh, right, but here we shall put the index in a car to there and the brake to there, but that's over now. Everything is united, from the consumer protection to pollution control to agricultural policy, everything. They are very strongly Europeanized on the same level, and it's under community regulation. But, ladies and gentlemen, on the other hand, I shall repeat this from time to time, that Macron in France, beyond doubt, is a good European and a good engine for Europe. But, of course, France, he relies on France when he has to define his role. The Hungarian, of course, again, will take his own country, his own identity in consideration when defining itself. The other is the European, but the two are coming together and belonging together. We cannot swap them because we do all this too fast. As some of the allied are demanding, then there should be a majority decision by the European Parliament that it has to be done, and it's compulsory. But let's assume or suppose what would happen to weapons export, and if there would be a vote in the European Parliament, how would this turn out? Either would bring about a decision, as Macron demands now, that Europe must be a world power if it doesn't want to disappear, and the perfectly different military options would be needed. Now just imagine that somebody in the European Parliament should ought to vote about the European army, which should go to Mali or to Syria or the Sahel belt, and the majority vote would not be enough because some country would say that would be beyond the borders. And again, France has a different stance, and English has a different stance, and we German historically are a bit different, so we can be very, very particular in these matters. We have to consider again and again that if we do need the reunification of Europe, which is concomitant to the European Parliament, then the border lines must be pulled up again. And I don't want to come into the details of that. But, for example, there was a great debate, an enormous debate, in fact, and at that time, in the Committee of Basic Issues, whose chairman I served, there was an indent which said the CSU endeavors to have a European federal state. I had it scratched out. There was a lot of debate, there were a lot against it, a lot for it, but in the end, the overwhelming majority said that yes, indeed, let's formulate it that way, that CSU would not endeavor to create a European federal state. Rather, we want the Europe of nations. This is what we want to say. This is our concept, which is substituted for the previous one. It has not been changed so far. And fortunately, it has not changed, so I don't want to go into the details of this. And don't misunderstand me if I speak about Europe. And we must see that if inside Europe we are criticizing, then one is quickly put into the box that he's Eurosceptic, anti-European, and I always say that if I criticize the Hungarian policy, I'm not against Hungary per se because of that. In Germany, I criticize the policy of the German federal government. Nobody would say that you are anti-German. No, inside Europe, quite often it happens very rapidly that if we criticize some European decision or we criticize the lack of decision, then we are being considered Eurosceptic or even anti-European quite often. Of course, There are debates about Schengen. There always been. Let's resolve the borders. Of course, at that time, as the Minister of Interior, I raised grave concerns about that. And the screen, in order to ensure the inner safety, I missed. Schengen is there, but of course, there are certain limitations in the Schengen area because of the refugee situation which has arisen. And of course, there are borders. Germany has a border, Hungary has a border, so the borders do exist. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, of course, it always raises the question how far we would go. And the famous German historian, one of the great historians of our time, Heinrich August Winkel, is the one whom I want to quote. If he was right, if he is right, he said, Europe cannot be against the nations, just jointly with the nations, together with the nations. That's how it can be united. Some well-trained cosmopolitans would point out the euphoria about Europe, which would simply sweep away the critical issues, oppressing them. In the wider population, in that, if I may put it that way, among the small people, it cannot be communicated without further ado, and Europe can only develop if the people will have the feeling that Europe, for them, personally, is beneficial. In the economy, this is happening. Therefore, Europe, if we consider this idea of freedom, the reason why I came to you today, this is a sentence of all-embracing meaning. In great things greater, we must be great. In small things, we must be small. And I don't want to expand on this any longer because my 8 years' activities as a chairman, I always elaborated on trying to restrain red tape in Europe. That would worthwhile an evening in per se. But anyway, how the laws are understood and what are the differences, how do they understand the laws in Malmö, Porto, Tallinn or Paris? Well, these differences again show that even though there are basic principles for legal regulations, and yet how different it is, how these new rules are understood and accepted and felt. So let me tell you quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, we have some problems which we can only resolve on a European level, and we have undoubtedly great challenges to confront where Europe's true assets are, where the majority is there for Europe, and where Europe won't accept the responsibility, of course, the issue of migration, the issue of security. How can we ensure, how can guarantee our safety for ourselves in a continent where 500 million citizens are living, where the world is changing fundamentally, where Putin and Erdogan will decide about the people's destinies, and we can just stand there shocked at the sidelines. There's a dualism in the world between Beijing and Washington, and Russia is included in the game somehow. But all these are such items where Europe, if it really wants to build its future, then in these questions of great magnitude, another route has to be found and walked on, because the migration issue can only be resolved by Europe, but Europe is incapable of resolving this problem. Everyone speaks about the outer borders where the things should be sorted out, and Frontex would have to decide about this, but we say, all right, we shall need 10,000 new people in the Frontex army, but before 2024 it's impossible, because there is a Dublin process which is not functioning at all, and it's not adapted to our problems of our age, and these are the things which we have to resolve. And with the next forthcoming problems, if we don't resolve it, then this Europe will not remain and stand so and with such a future as we want it, and every country has a role in it. Hungary, Poland, and ladies and gentlemen, I think, may I say so, if that is there, then the politics of the protection of the climate will come up again, and We can only resolve this on a European level, so the industry, as a Europe of industrialized countries, we can make some progress. And of course, that situation can only be handled by the example how an industrial society can be reshaped for an environmental conscious society and state protecting the environment. This is very demanding, which cannot be resolved by a few protests. This is a very tough choice and they're requiring a very tough response because individual countries have different concepts about this problem. As I heard in Budapest, a climatic crisis situation was announced by the new mayor of the city. Now, I want to know what is the consequence of this? How would they resolve this? If there is an emergency situation, you should not declare that, but you should fight that. If you put in a warning and there is a situation of crisis without anything happening, then for the politics it's very difficult to come out from this problem. So let me clearly set forth, ladies and gentlemen, once again, the single most important task will be to keep Europe together. In order to accomplish this, the cultural differences must be taken into account, all those cultural specifics which are typical for Eastern Europe. We must take in consideration the East European countries' cultural situation, or in Central European countries, whichever way we call them, but these are the countries which just joined the Union in 2004, and of course, they have a different historic path than that of West Europe. They have different historic involvement. Let me take Poland, a country which was divided up 3 times in 1795, 1799, and 1811, and then it disappeared from the map, which in 1918, in the wake of the First World War, was reconstituted after more than 100 years regaining their suzerainty. And after that, they had a difficult period to live in. And first Piłsudski, and then Hitler, and the attack, and then for 40 years a communist dictatorship in which they lived. And after that, finally, Solidarność and the movement started the age of freedom. But of course, there are a few such interventions which, on the basis of European agreements on behalf of the Commission, would come. But of course, they are differently received than they are received in liberal states such as Belgium, Netherlands, the Benelux countries, or Germany or France. And thus, if I say at this point that Europe must become a world power, and then to call Adenauer, then I have to build up the bridges that everyone would want this together, and what would this be concomitant with. And these are the challenges. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just covered a few items about the refugee and migration policy. Here, transformations are needed and greater impetus. We have to handle the outer borders differently, and we cannot maintain on the long term that Erdogan, who is visiting Budapest today, in order to accomplish his own objective, would threaten Europe or to apply pressure to Europe that he would open his borders, because he says almost every day that he would open the borders. And of course, 3 million people, if they had started towards Europe or if they had reached Europe, then that would create a lot of problems in integrations, and we have to be stronger at this point. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I tell you something to the Hungarians as well. I speak of the proposal of the Visegrad countries. In 2016, there was a summit meeting 3 years ago, indeed. At that time, in a majority, a decision was brought about that there would be a flexible restriction, and we demand this, so a flexible new process, and I think that could be a better solution, a better starting point, that each and every country equally would contribute to the policy on refugees in Europe, and also in their own way. So this cannot be a total solution, although Hungary, the Czech Republic, so they have some initiatives. You know what I cover. So the problem must be differently in each and every country. So if we unify too much, then we shall live a status where we shall decide on a quota, and then quite a few countries won't receive this quota, And then the court won't be unable to redress this problem. And I must say this at this point, so here political solutions are needed the way I imagine, envisage this. Ladies and gentlemen, in brief, let me mention just one more thing, because this is a topic for the Hungarians and in case of the committee,
eine Konsequenz fordern.
I think there will be a consequence here. The Europeans, because of the changed situation, must be more capable of playing their role in the world's policy.
I think that, Macron was saying it very tough. Was very tough in saying this, and there was a contradiction coming from Chancellor Merkel. So there's still a lot of debates to be expected. Well, I told in the interview, do you still believe in the Solidarity Pact? Do you still think that Americans, if the Estonian border is attacked, do you think that the Americans would help? No, I don't think we should. We don't think they should help. So what does that mean? So an ally cannot be replaced by anything, but the ally would have a completely different nature, and the Europeans do not have any protective power. So we have to decide our own security and safety. We have to decide about our own measures. This is what the Minister of Defense in Germany is dealing with. We have to take a much bigger military responsibility. If we think it seriously, it's not enough on the long term that we are angry. We, Germans, are world champions in being angry. And the Minister of Defense of Germany is actually the best example for that. So he always being shocked by a couple of things, but what is the consequence? On the long run, it is not going to be okay. We have to take our own fate into our own hands. Just imagine that this is the strongest market, a stronger market and stronger power than China or the United States, I mean Europe. So who will decide about the central problem? So what is happening with regard to Syria? 3 people decided. Of course, there is no democratic legitimacy, which we think they should have. Like we have Putin there and Erdogan. And they are the 3. They are the ones who decide about it. But also at the Syrian border, where there is, they set up a wide band and make the Kurds withdraw from there. But I do not think that this will work on the long run, for sure. So for me, this is what matters now. So a radical thing that Macron is demanding. But we should also see that the French Macron is just like 41 years old. He's young, full of dynamism. He's ahead of some elections, and I think that Le Pen is not going to be successful, but it's still quite a big challenge for France. So Macron is there, whether being re-elected, and in Germany, Merkel will not be there anymore. So he will be a decisive factor in European policy. So this will play a very important role. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight and on this eve, in a very conscious manner, I'm meeting Prime Minister Orbán tomorrow. I would like to actually convey to you greetings from Markus Söder, who received a high-level decoration from Hungary, and also Manfred Weber. They both sent or conveyed a message through me to Viktor Orban, and if I can contribute a little bit to eliminating difficulties in the relationship, because we do have to eliminate this, because we have different tasks to follow, and I very much hope that we will be able to do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are historical dates, events that we remember if we were the witnesses. But we have to know that November the 9th meant the start of Europe's reunification. And for about half of the people, this is not something that people can take for granted. You know, this was 30 years ago, and if someone in Germany today is 40 years old, then he went through all these events as he or she was a child. If I go to a class in the secondary school that are just passing the school living exam, and then we are talking about the new London of the former GDPR, and they say, what do you mean by new Länder? I have to explain it to them. They not necessarily know it, like Saxony. Why is it a new land and Bavaria is an old one? So the German Federal Republic has changed a lot, but so did Europe. And as a final word, I would like to highlight that we Germans, and me exceptionally, in the summer of 1989, we will never forget for the Hungarians that they opened the borders, and we always leave an important place for Hungary in our history, which can never be a question, no matter what kind of disputes we have had. Helmut Kohl told about the European unity, that European unity was conceived on Hungarian soil. That is where we laid down the first rails, and this applies to everyone, actually. The situation is not that we forget about Helmut Kohl in Germany, no way. I have actually debated quite a lot with him, but let me just share with you two things. So one that applies to the German unity, and the second is the European development. They both are interrelated. So without development, without trust that people laid in the people, was laid in the people, this could not have been possible, nor could have been possible. In 1990, the Americans were obsessed with the Kuwait and Iraq. So there was this American policy, and the American administration was concentrating mostly on that. And when the wall collapsed, and luckily there was no global event, so to speak, and we did not have infinite time. So had Kohl been debating on it for quite long, because as much as I know how the Germans love debating, they could still debate till to date, and there would be no German unity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, finally, a great respect to the Hungarians. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I am actually very grateful that I had the opportunity to present this on my personal view. And for me, it was very, very important for me that I can be there at this event personally, as a person who went through it physically and who, to a certain extent, could influence, because I was working in that. I very much hope that tomorrow I'll have some very nice meeting with the members of the Hungarian government. And thank you very much again for your kind attention. Thank you.
Herr Ministerpräsident, wir danken Ihnen ganz herzlich.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for your fine words. This incredible arch which you charted out for us with your personal experience, issues pertaining to daily policies, returning to history, and indeed, you reached some fundamental conclusions. After such a lengthy trip, it was really absolutely stunning that the presentation of the Bavarian Minister Emeritus really rounded up this day. I would only add that Helmut Kohl has said that the German unity was grown in Hungarian land. In 1862, József Eötvös has said that the Hungarian freedom's prerequisite was the German unity. It's a perfectly different historic situation, but I think for centuries this historic dependency was excellently shown. Ladies and gentlemen, fortunately, there are not only snowballs are fried on a grid, as Franz Strauss has said, but other things too. So we have some reception now in the Driny room on the second floor. So you're all kindly expected there. And let's meet again tomorrow at 10, continuing the conference with additional excellent presenters. Thank you very much for having me here. We're expecting you back tomorrow. Thank you.